The desert was quiet in the early dusk, save for the soft rustle of dry sagebrush and the whisper of wind brushing across the trail. Dust hung low in the air, casting a golden haze over the rocky earth. Coyotes howled in the distance, far off, yet ever present. It was a place where few dared linger after dark. But Tazi, the silent Apache warrior, moved through the landscape like a shadow, deliberate, unseen, and attuned to every sound the desert gave him. He had been tracking wild goats for hours, bow in hand, eyes sharp beneath his brow. But something stopped him mid-stride, something small and oddly out of place. There, near the edge of the trail, curled up in the dust like a forgotten doll, was a little girl. She couldn't have been older than 6, blonde hair tangled and dirty, her skin scorched by the sun, and her lips cracked from thirst. Her tiny dress was torn at the hem, and her bare feet were blistered. Tazi didn't move for a long moment. His instinct was to avoid such things. Trouble came in many forms, and this one reeked of it. A white child alone in Apache land could mean only one of 3 things: raiders, death, or bait. But still, he watched. She wasn't dead. Her chest rose in shallow breaths. She clutched something tightly, in one hand a piece of faded ribbon, and her other hand trembled as she dreamt. She whimpered softly, a sound too weak to call for help, yet too human to ignore. Tazi stepped closer, each movement measured, silent. He crouched down beside her, his shadow falling over her tiny form. Her eyelids fluttered, and for the briefest second, she opened her eyes, blue, wide, terrified. But when she saw his face, she didn't scream. She just looked at him. Her lips parted as if to speak, but nothing came. Her hand went limp, and the ribbon fell to the dust. Tazi reached for his canteen and poured a few drops of water into her mouth. She gasped slightly, but swallowed. A small part of him hoped she would run or scream. It would make walking away easier. But she only stared at him, her expression unreadable, then closed her eyes and drifted again into unconsciousness. He should have left her there. Every law of survival, every whisper of the old ways told him to walk away. The white world and his did not mix. The cost of kindness was often paid in blood. But something inside him, the same part that had kept him from becoming a war-hardened ghost, leaned in. He brushed the dirt from her cheek and murmured the only words he would speak. That night, "Come with me." She didn't respond, but she didn't resist when he scooped her into his arms. She weighed nothing. She smelled of dust and sickness and fear. Tazi looked back once, down the trail stretching west. Wagon wheel tracks, blood spatters half hidden by wind-blown sand. Whatever wagon train she'd come from had been ambushed or abandoned. Who left a child to die alone in the desert? He turned his back on that question and moved swiftly, disappearing into the low hills with the girl pressed against his chest. His moccasins barely made a sound on the rock. His path curved away from the trail, far into Apache territory. He didn't know what the elders would say. He didn't know if he'd be welcomed at all. But he had made his decision. As the stars blinked into the sky, the wind carried with it a silence so deep, it felt sacred. In the folds of that silence, a wounded man carried a forgotten child, and neither of them knew how that moment would change the rest of their lives. Taji's return to the Apache camp was met with more silence than welcome. The moon was high by the time he crested the last ridge overlooking the valley where his people had made their home for the season. Fires burned low in scattered circles, casting flickering light over the adobe shelters and lindos. Smoke rose slowly into the crisp mountain air. Crickets chirped somewhere in the distance. A dog barked once, then fell quiet, but eyes were watching even in the dark. They saw him tall and broad-shouldered, walking with that familiar, deliberate gait. But what they saw clutched against his chest made several warriors reach for their knives. A white child, pale as bone, carried like kin. Tazi didn't flinch under their stares. He walked straight into the heart of the camp and knelt by the healer's fire, placing the girl gently on a woven mat. She stirred only faintly, murmuring something in her sleep, a name, maybe, or a plea. Several women had gathered, their faces unreadable. One old woman, Sani, the tribe's midwife and keeper of the old ways, stepped forward first, her lined face creased with concern, not for the child, but for what her presence might mean. "She is not of us," Sani said quietly, crouching beside the child. "Where did you find her?" Tazi said nothing. He never did, not unless the words were worth the weight they carried. Another man stepped forward, Kane, a young warrior quick to speak and quicker to judge. "She's bait," he said sharply, "left by soldiers or settlers to test us, or worse, she's cursed. The spirits of the white men do not walk with peace." Murmurs echoed around them. Some nodded in agreement, others looked at Taza not with hatred, but confusion. He was respected, feared, even a warrior who had proven himself in battle, a scout who never spoke, but never failed to return. But this bringing a white child into their sacred place, it was unheard of. Sani dipped her fingers into a gourd of water and gently touched the girl's forehead. She is burning up, she muttered, starved, dehydrated. If she is bait, they did not give her much hope. Tazi finally looked up, his dark eyes locked with Sani's. He gave a slight nod, a gesture that said, "She is mine now." Sani sighed. "Then she will stay, for tonight." Kane stepped forward. "You cannot decide this alone, old woman. This affects us all." Sani's eyes flared, and yet, none of you stopped him at the gate. That silenced the group. Tazi sat back as Sani began preparing herbs and salves for the girl. He removed his water pouch and held it to her lips. The child drank, weakly, and her lashes fluttered open. She looked around, dazed, then her gaze landed on Tazi, and she relaxed. She didn't cry, she didn't beg. She simply reached for his hand and held it. The other women watched closely. The child's presence was unsettling. Yes, but something in her was not like the others. She wasn't loud, or spoiled, or frantic like settler children they had seen before. She moved like a ghost, quiet, almost reverent. The next morning, the tribal council convened. Under the shade of a tall juniper tree, the elders gathered with painted faces and stony expressions. Tazi stood before them, the girl seated beside him, bundled in a wool blanket. Her hair had been combed, her face gently washed. The council demanded answers. Tazi gave few. He told them where he found her alone, near the wagon trail. No signs of others nearby, no blood, no prints, no trap, just her. She should have died, one elder said. But she didn't, Sani replied. She is a burden we cannot afford, said another. The white soldiers will come. Tazi finally spoke, just 3 words, but they fell like thunder. I will protect. It wasn't a plea, it wasn't a question, it was a promise, and for now, that was enough. The council relented, but with conditions. The girl would stay, but she would not enter sacred grounds. She would not learn tribal customs. She would remain under Taji's watch, and hers would be a shadowed presence, not a welcomed one. Tazi accepted. Back at his tent, he laid her down on a bed of furs. She looked up at him with those same wide, unreadable eyes. He gave her a piece of dried meat, and she chewed slowly, gratefully. She still hadn't spoken a word, but when he turned away to tend the fire, she whispered something under her breath. Papa. He froze. The fire crackled, but he said nothing. Outside, the wind stirred the sand inside. The burden had only begun. Eliza did not cry, not when she woke up in a strange place surrounded by strangers, not when she realized her family wasn't coming for her, not even when the nights grew cold and the sounds of the desert howling wind, distant animals. The drumbeat of fires grew louder than anything she'd known before. She simply sat beside Tazi, the silent Apache who had carried her from death's edge, and watched. The other children in the camp watched her too, but from a distance. They whispered behind their hands, called her ghost child or coyote bait. Some threw pebbles at her when they thought Tazi wasn't looking, but she never flinched, never fought back. She just looked at them, calm and unreadable, like someone who'd seen far worse than teasing. The women were more curious than cruel. Sani, the old midwife, fed her soup and tried to coax a smile. Another woman offered her woven dolls. A third tried to comb her tangled yellow hair. Eliza accepted the food. She stared at the dolls, but when anyone reached for her, she always pulled back unless it was Tazi. To him, she clung. She would follow him wherever he went, even on long walks through the scrubland. She copied the way he crouched to study animal tracks. She'd sit beside him at the edge of camp while he cleaned his arrows, or stitched his worn leather pouch. She mimicked the way he moved, silent, grounded, like a leaf that never rustled even when the wind blew hard. It became a quiet ritual between them. He never asked questions, and she never gave answers, but in that silence, something unspoken formed a thread between their wounds. Some nights, she'd wake from dreams with a shudder. She'd sit upright in her pile of furs, clutching the faded ribbon she always kept near. Tazi, already awake, would glance over, and she'd crawl to his side. He would cover her with his blanket and say nothing, no lullaby, no story, just warmth and silence. It was enough. Still, the whispers in the village grew louder. She is not one of us. She brings soldiers. She'll curse our water. She'll leave, and he'll be broken. Tazi ignored them, as he had ignored most things in his life. His loyalty was not to gossip or fear. His heart, though he rarely showed it, had already claimed the girl. She had become his shadow, and he had no intention of letting it disappear. But the rest of the tribe wasn't so sure. One morning, after Tazi returned from a hunting trip, he found Eliza sitting alone outside their tent staring into the fire. Her cheeks streaked with dirt, but still no tears. A small wound marked her temple, red and swelling. One of the older boys had thrown a rock. Tazi didn't say a word. He crouched beside her and gently wiped the blood with a damp cloth. She looked up at him with calm, hollow eyes, and whispered, "I'm not scared." He didn't answer. But that night, while the boy's family slept, Tazi left a bundle of bloody feathers on their doorstep. No one asked what it meant. Eliza's strength wasn't just in her silence. It was in how she began to absorb the world around her quietly. Like rain sinking into dry ground, she watched how the women ground corn, how they tied bundles of herbs, how they hummed to sleeping babies. She studied how the warriors moved, how they held their bows, how they stood still before a hunt. One day, without asking, she brought Tazi a freshly plucked yucca flower. She didn't speak. She just placed it in his lap and sat beside him. Later, that evening, when the wind blew hard through the hills, she turned to him and asked, "Do you have a daughter?" Tazi looked at her. A long silence passed before he answered, "No." She nodded once, then whispered, "Can I be yours?" The words weren't dramatic. They weren't said with tears, but they struck like thunder between the two of them. Tazi didn't answer. He only wrapped his blanket round her shoulders and let her lean into him. As the wind howled outside, she never cried, not once. Not when her memories returned in broken flashes, not when others pushed her away, and not even when she finally whispered the truth into the wind. "They left me." It wasn't an accusation, it was a fact. Her family was gone. The world she came from had vanished in gunfire and flames. She had survived it not by fighting, not by fleeing, but by quietly enduring like the desert itself. And in that endurance, the silent Apache saw a reflection of himself. He didn't need her tears to understand her pain. She didn't need his words to know she belonged. The sun hadn't yet crested the red hills when the murmurs began. This started in the women's circle, by the cook fire, carried on the smoke of dried sage and roasted maize. By mid-morning, they had drifted to the men sharpening arrows, the hunters checking their saddles, the elders seated in the shade of the cedar trees. Everywhere Eliza went, silence followed, but behind her back, the tribe whispered, "She grows too comfortable. He teaches her too much. It is dangerous. The whites will come looking. He forgets she is not one of us." Tazi heard it all. He always did. But he never acknowledged the talk, never changed his path. Each day, he took Eliza out beyond the camp to teach her the ways of the land, not with words, but with action. He showed her how to spot rabbit tracks, how to test the wind for scent, how to move without leaving a footprint. She followed him like a shadow, mimicking everything with quiet determination. And that was what unsettled them most. She was learning. She was becoming Apache not in blood, but in heart. That night, as the drums began to beat in preparation for a sacred moon rite, Tazi was summoned to the council fire. The message came from Sani herself, delivered with eyes filled with regret. "You must come," she said, not as warrior, as father. He stood without a word. Eliza reached for his hand, but he gently pulled away, motioning for her to stay behind. Her blue eyes, sharper now than they had been weeks ago, studied his face with a flicker of worry, but she obeyed. She never questioned him aloud. The council sat in a wide circle, their faces lit by fire and lined with both age and burden. Smoke from burning cedar wafted between them, as if the ancestors themselves were listening. Kane, the young warrior who had always eyed Eliza with suspicion, was the first to speak. "She learns our ways," he said, voice hard. "She walks with warriors, watches the hunt. Soon she will speak our tongue. What happens when soldiers come and find her here? What happens when she leads them back?" "She is a child," Sani countered, her tone calm but firm. "One who has brought no harm." Kane pointed to Tazi. "He is not her blood. She is not Apache." He clouds his judgment with pity. He forgets his place. Tazi stared into the fire, his jaw clenched, but he said nothing. "She has not spoken of her past." Another elder added, "What if her memory returns? What if she names us?" "She remembers," Sani said quietly. "She remembers everything." That silenced the group. Taji's gaze flicked toward Sani, sharp and questioning. "She told me," Sani continued, addressing the circle. "Her family was attacked by raiders, not ours, a band of desperate men from the border towns, wearing union coats to throw blame. She was left for dead. Tazi found her. That is the only truth here. She is not cursed, asked one of the elders. No, Sun Yi replied. She is broken, like many of us. That word broken hung in the air. And then Tazi stood, not rushed, not angry, just certain. The fire lit the edges of his face, carved from stone. As he finally spoke, she is mine. A ripple passed through the circle. Taji's voice was low, but carried like a drumbeat. The white world left her. She is no one. She does not cry. She does not complain. She learns, she listens, she belongs. Do you mean to raise her? Kane asked coldly. Tazi looked directly at him. I already am. More silence. Even the flames seemed to still. Then the eldest of them all, Greyhawk, whose words were few but final, nodded once. So be it, he said. But if she brings danger to us, it will be your blood on the ground beside hers. Tazi didn't flinch. I accept. When he returned to their small lodge, Eliza was waiting by the fire, clutching her ribbon like a lifeline. He crouched beside her and placed a piece of stone-carved turquoise in her palm, his only keepsake. From his mother, long dead. A token passed down through generations. Eliza looked at it, then at him. What is it? She whispered. He looked at her, then said, low and certain, family. And that night, though the whispers in the village didn't stop, they quieted, because, even in the harshest lands, sometimes the fiercest warriors choose not to fight with fists but with the simple, defiant act of protecting someone no one else wanted. Eliza began to remember things she didn't want to. It started with a smell of flash of smoke in the air, as a woman in the camp roasted corn over the fire. The scent curled into her nostrils and pulled her backward, into a memory that struck. Without warning, a woman's scream, the choking burn of flames, and the snap of a leather whip against the canvas of a wagon. She dropped the corn she had been peeling and stared at her hands, shaking. Tazi noticed, as he always did. He didn't ask, he didn't speak. He simply walked to her side and sat with her as she stared into nothing. That night, her dreams returned with brutal clarity. She screamed in her sleep for the first time, loud, sharp, like the girl she had never allowed herself to be in the weeks since her rescue. Tazi woke instantly and pulled her close. She kicked and thrashed before realizing who he was. Then she collapsed against him, shaking. Wagon fire, she whispered. There was blood. My mother, she pushed me out, she told me to hide under the wagon. Then the men came. She buried her face in his shoulder. They wore blue coats, but they weren't soldiers. They laughed. They took everything, and then they left me. Tazi didn't speak. He just held her until her breathing slowed. By morning, she was silent again, but something in her had changed. She began drawing in the dirt with sticks, lines, shapes, wagon wheels, and figures with long rifles. One figure she drew over and over was a woman with long braids and kind eyes. Another was a man with a jagged mouth, always drawn with a flame behind him. Sani came to sit beside her and watched quietly. She remembers more than we thought, the old woman said softly, and it will keep coming. Eliza didn't stop drawing for days. Her memories came in pieces. Her father's strong hands fixing the wagon wheel, her baby brother crying, a red scarf her mother wore, and the smell of molasses bread baking in the fire. But just as often came the darker images, shadows of men with rifles, faces hidden under wide hats, the smell of smoke and blood. One morning, she placed a stick in Taji's hand and pointed to the dust. Draw your mother, she whispered. He looked at her. His hand trembled slightly just once, but he obeyed. He knelt and began to trace shapes into the earth. At first, it was simple, just a circle for a face. Then details followed, long hair, strong cheekbones, a necklace made of bone and turquoise. She had this, he said quietly, pointing to the turquoise piece he had given Eliza. She looked like you. Eliza whispered. Tazi gave a rare, almost smile. Eliza leaned her head on his shoulder. I think mine looked like yours too. It was the first time she'd spoken of her mother without crying. Word of Eliza's memory spread through the camp, and not all welcomed the news. Kane, always lurking like a coiled snake, whispered doubts to the younger warriors. If she remembers raiders, she might also remember maps, places, names. She could lead soldiers back to us. But the elders had begun to soften. They saw what Sunny saw, a girl shaped by pain, surviving through silence, and learning to love a world that had once seemed her enemy. She is not a child of war, Sunny told the council. She is a child of loss, like many of us, and the more she remembers, the more she belongs. Eliza continued to grow stronger. She could now ride a small pony on her own, She helped gather herbs with the older women, and she had learned to say thank you in Apache. Her drawings improved, too. Less death, more lifebirds, baskets, stars. But the pain still lingered. One evening, while sitting beside the fire with Tazi, she asked a question she had held in her heart since the day she was found. "Why did you take me?" Tazi stared into the flames for a long time before answering. "I saw myself," he said, "small, alone, waiting for someone to come." Eliza was quiet. Then she reached for his hand and whispered, "Thank you." It wasn't just gratitude. It was the closing of a door. She could never forget what had happened, but now she could begin to live with it. In the dust, in the silence, in the hard-earned stillness of their camp, a wounded child and a quiet warrior sat side by side, their scars beginning to heal not by forgetting, but by remembering together. The air turned uneasy before the sound of hooves ever reached them. Tazi felt it first, in the wind that shifted to fast, to sudden. The birds stopped calling. The deer in the lower canyon vanished. The dogs barked through the night with no clear cause. The elders noticed it too, and by the second day, a scout returned with grim news. Soldiers. Bluecoats. A patrol of at least 20 men, moving slow and wide through the hills, near the river, searching, looking for something, or someone. Whispers flew through the Apache camp like wildfire. Not since the winter raids had troops been this close, and now, with a white child among them, fear wrapped its claws around every fire circle. "They've come for her," someone muttered. "She'll bring them straight to us. We warned him." Tazi didn't argue. He didn't speak at all, but his eyes sharpened like flint, and his hand never strayed far from the knife at his belt. He watched the sky, the shadows, the faces of his people, some loyal, others flickering with doubt. Eliza, unaware of the full danger, sensed the change. "Why is everyone so quiet?" she asked one morning, sitting beside Tazi as he checked his weapons. He didn't answer right away. He rarely did. Then he said softly, "People are afraid." She looked around. "Of me?" He nodded once. Her small face grew tight. "Not scared, ashamed. I didn't tell them to come." She whispered, "I don't want to go back." Tazi turned to her, crouching so they were eye level. "I know." That night, he met with Sunny privately. They sat beside a low fire as coyotes howled in the hills. "I must take her away," Tazi said. "Before they come closer, she will not be safe out there." Sunny warned, "She is not safe here either." He replied, "Not if some among us believe the soldiers are her shadow. You will not return. I will not lead them here." Sunny nodded solemnly. "Then take this." She handed him a pouch of sacred herbs for her dreams. By sunrise, Tazi had packed 2 horses with supplies: dried meat, water skins, and a blanket woven by his mother long ago. Eliza stood silently as he tied the bags. She didn't ask where they were going. "Will we come back?" she finally asked, her voice barely a breath. "Maybe," he said. "Will they be angry?" "Yes." She nodded, then climbed up behind him on the horse without another word. As they rode out of camp, few watched them leave, but Kene did from a distance, arms folded across his chest, mouth tight with something that was not quite triumph, but not grief either. Tazi didn't look back. They rode hard for 2 days, through rock and scrub and into the high ridges, where the pines grew thick and the wind smelled of snow. Tazi knew a hidden canyon where an old friend once lived, an outcast healer named Nala, who owed him a debt. Eliza didn't complain once. She held tight to Taji's belt, her cheek pressed to his back. She asked no questions, though fear crept into her eyes more each night as the world around her grew colder and more wild. On the 3rd day, they reached the canyon, a narrow pass hidden behind a curtain of trees. Smoke curled from a low chimney. Nala, now old and half-blind, opened the door with a wooden cane and a suspicious eye. But when she saw Tazi, her face softened. "You are hunted," she said. "Yes. And the girl? She is mine." Nala stared at Eliza, who stepped forward and bowed her head slightly. "I won't be trouble," she said. The old woman smiled. "Good. I only keep wolves here, not rabbits." Back in the Apache camp, the soldiers finally arrived 5 days too late. Their boots crushed the dry ground. They asked questions, flashed papers, said a settler caravan had been ambushed, said a girl had gone missing. Kene answered coolly, "We have seen no white child." The captain narrowed his eyes. "Are you sure? If one had come here," Kene said, "we would not keep her." They left after searching the area, frustrated and empty-handed, but they had marked the camp's location, and that was enough to stir dread among the elders. Tazi had bought them time, but not peace, and somewhere in the mountains, A silent warrior and the girl who would not cry made their temporary home in a forgotten canyon, far from bullets, far from gossip, and far from the only life either of them had known. For now, the canyon was not a place made for comfort, but it was made for survival. It lay buried behind cliffs that cut off sound and sky, a narrow crease in the earth wrapped in shadow and pine. Few knew of it, fewer still dared to live there. But Tazi had remembered this place, carved deep into memory from years ago when he'd been wounded in a skirmish, and nursed by the reclusive healer, Nala. Now, years later, he returned not wounded in flesh, but carrying the weight of a different wound, the child who followed him silently through the brush, whose spirit was hardening like stone beneath the quiet grief she bore. Eliza didn't ask when they would leave. She didn't complain when they shared cold rabbit for breakfast, or when their fire was kept low to avoid drawing eyes from the ridges. She didn't speak of the soldiers, or the whispers in camp, or even the ache of being unwanted. She simply watched Tazi as she always had, learning. And in those high hills, the girl grew strong. Each morning, Tazi showed her something new: how to spot mountain lion tracks, how to rub sap on a wound, how to listen to the birds for warnings. She mimicked his every movement with quiet precision. Though he spoke little, she understood him, his nods, his silences, his subtle signals. Nala, the healer, took to Eliza faster than anyone expected. "She's not soft," the old woman said, watching Eliza carry water from the creek without spilling a drop. "She's like desert ironwood, slow to bloom, but near impossible to break." Eliza didn't smile at the compliment, but she sat closer to Nala that night by the fire, listening to her tell stories in the old Apache tongue. Tales of shapeshifters, star spirits, and ghost horses. She didn't always understand the words, but she listened all the same. Tazi carved her a small bow from juniper wood. She didn't thank him aloud, but the next day, he watched her practice until her fingers bled. One evening, as the stars pushed through the darkening sky, Eliza spoke without being asked. "I don't miss them," she said quietly, staring at the fire. "My family, not like I thought I would." Tazi didn't look at her. He didn't interrupt. "I think it's not them I miss, it's who I was with them. That girl, the one who laughed and sang and didn't know what blood smelled like." Her voice was steady, her eyes distant. "I'm not her anymore." Tazi nodded slowly. "You are someone new." She looked at him, surprised he answered. "Is that bad?" she asked. "No," he said. "It means you're still becoming." In the canyon, days blurred. Time no longer ticked by in wagon wheels or gunfire, but in the turning of the moon and the crackle of wood. Eliza began to hum to herself while she worked, something she'd not done since before the raid. Nala taught her old healing songs, and Tazi let her ride ahead during hunts. But peace never stays long in Apache land. One morning, a hawk call echoed strangely across the ridge sharp, then cut short. Tazi stood immediately. Eliza saw it too, the way his muscles tensed, the way his hand moved to the knife at his waist. Someone was out there. Nahla confirmed it later with a grave nod. Tracks, 2 men, white boots, moved north, didn't come close, but there, watching. "Scouts?" Eliza asked. "Maybe," Tazi answered, "or bounty men." That night, Eliza slept with her boots on. Tazi sat awake, sharpening his blade slowly, rhythmically. He had hoped to buy more time, but time was running out. Eliza rose before dawn and sat beside him. "If they find us," she said softly, "will you give me back?" Taji's knife paused on the stone. "No," she nodded, as if she'd already known. "I won't let them take me," she whispered. He looked at her, really looked, her thin frame, her knotted hair, the ribbon still tied around her wrist, and the fire in her eyes. "You're not the same girl I found," he said. She looked into the flames. "Good." And just like that, she smiled, a small one, crooked, tired, and a little broken but real. It was the first time he'd seen it. Up in the mountains, beyond the law and the tribe and the reach of war. A child and a warrior prepared not just for the enemy that might come, but for the future they were building together, breath by breath. And for the first time in either of their lives, the future no longer looked like nowhere. It looked like theirs. They came just after sunset. Not soldiers, not bluecoats with polished rifles and Union flags, but something worse. Bounty hunters, 3 of them, riding hard across the ridge with the ease of men who'd tracked fugitives through dust and death. Their coats were long, dust-covered, guns hung heavy from their belts. One wore a wide-brimmed hat with a crow feather in it. Another had a jagged scar running down his jaw, and the third silent as a vulture carried a coil of rope on his saddle horn. They didn't call out, didn't announce themselves. They didn't have to. Tazi saw them first. He'd been watching the northern trail from a ledge above the canyon, crouched in the shadows, eyes sharp as a hawk. When the riders crested the far ridge and paused to scan the landscape, his stomach sank. These men weren't wandering. They knew. He turned and moved like smoke through the trees, dropping into the canyon where Eliza and Nala were just finishing supper. Pack, he said. Eliza looked up from the fire. Her hand moved instinctively to the bough Tazi had carved for her. Who is it? She asked. Already standing. Hunters. Nala didn't argue. The old healer began tossing herbs into a leather pouch. Eliza slipped her quiver over her shoulder. Tazi checked his rifle, eyes flicking toward the ridge line. They had minutes if that. They didn't get them. A gunshot cracked through the canyon like lightning splitting stone. A bullet tore into the tree just above Nala's door. Bark exploded. Horses screamed. They're here, Eliza cried, grabbing Taji's hand. The bounty hunters descended fast, like wolves scenting blood. One dismounted, rushing toward the canyon with a revolver drawn. The man with the crow feathers stayed high on the ledge, covering the trail with a long-range rifle. Tazi pushed Eliza behind a boulder. Stay down. He darted from cover. Rifle raised. Another shot rang out, this one from Tazi. It struck the scarred man clean in the shoulder, spinning him backward into the dirt. But the vulture-faced one was already flanking them. Eliza watched in horror as Tazi and the remaining two hunters exchanged fire. The sound was deafening. Smoke filled the canyon. Sparks lit from the rocks. Nala screamed behind them, ducking. Inside her hut. And then, the unthinkable. Tazi was hit. A flash of blood burst from his side. He staggered, dropped to one knee but didn't fall. He aimed again and fired, missed. The man with the crow feather took aim right at Taji's head. Eliza didn't think. She grabbed Taji's second rifle, dragged it up over the boulder, and aimed. Her hands trembled. Her heart thundered. And then crack. The bullet didn't hit the bounty hunter, but it struck close enough to send him diving behind cover. Tazi looked up, dazed, and saw her crouched over the rifle, eyes wide, jaw clenched. You said I needed to learn, she said, her voice cracking. I did. He motioned to her, run. But she didn't. Instead, she pulled another arrow from her quiver and began to notch it. A sudden yell broke through the trees. Nala, old and furious, hurling a clay pot of burning herbs onto the trail. Flames roared up behind the remaining attacker, cutting off his path. Confused, he turned just long enough for Tazi to lunge forward and drive his blade into the man's thigh. The man howled, dropped his gun. Tazi stood, bleeding, but steady. It was over in minutes. The scarred man crawled away, screaming. The vulture-faced hunter vanished into the dark. The one Tazi had stabbed lay groaning in the dirt, hand over his wound. Eliza ran to Tazi, helped him lower himself to the ground. You're hurt, she said, voice shaking. He nodded, wincing. Not deep. Nala emerged, ash-smeared and breathless. You're lucky, she spat, or stubborn. Eliza looked around at the blood on the rocks, the smoke in the air, the way her bowstring still trembled in her hand. And then she said something none of them expected. I remember now. Tazi looked at her. I remember the man who killed my mother. He had a scar on his face, the one who ran tonight. Taji's jaw tightened. He was laughing when he did it. Eliza's hands curled into fists. He came for me again. And he ran again. Tazi nodded. Next time. He won't. They didn't bury the bodies. They left them for the scavengers. The message would travel faster that way. By morning, they were gone again, heading deeper into nowhere. Tazi still limped. Eliza still held her bow like a lifeline. But neither of them looked back. Blood had been spilled. But more than that, something had changed in Eliza. The girl who once lay helpless beside a trail had stood her ground. And this silent Apache who'd once walked alone now bled for someone else. The wind had shifted. It no longer carried the scent of danger but of pine and distant rain. And for the first time in weeks, Tazi slept soundly. His wound was healing, slow but steady, stitched tightly by Nala's careful hands and packed daily with crushed herbs. Eliza sat at the fire, sharpening arrows with practiced hands. She wasn't the same girl who'd once curled in the dust, clutching a ribbon and waiting for someone to save her. She was stronger now, quieter, but not afraid, never afraid. They had spent nearly 2 weeks in a hidden hollow deeper in the high country, where few dared roam. The land was colder, rockier, but peaceful. There were wild onions near the stream, trout in the pools, and plenty of dry wood. Tazi had chosen it for that reason. But it wasn't just a hiding place anymore. It was becoming home. Each morning, Eliza rose before the sun, fetched water, and checked the snares they had laid near the hills. She could gut a rabbit now, skin a squirrel clean, and cook it with just the right amount of ash and salt. Nala had taught her the healing uses of roots, and Tazi, though never much for words, had begun to teach her the old ways of his people. How to read the shape of clouds, how to move with the wind, how to feel the pulse of the earth beneath her feet. One morning, Eliza looked up from the fire and said, "Will I ever go back?" Tazi didn't answer right away. He watched the smoke rise from her cooking pot, his face unreadable. "Go back where?" he asked. She hesitated. "To the world I came from. The white people, towns, dresses, schools." Taji's gaze remained fixed on the flames. "Do you want to?" Eliza was quiet. Then she shook her head. "No," she said. "Not if you're not there." He looked at her, then really looked. Her cheeks were sundark now. Her hair was tied back in a rough braid like the other girls in the Apache village used to wear. Her hands were calloused, but her eyes were still hers, blue as sky, sharp as a hawk's. "You are not Apache by blood," he said slowly. "But you are of us now." Eliza nodded. "I don't care about blood." That night, Nala came to them with a bundle wrapped in deerskin. "It is time," she said. She handed the bundle to Eliza, who opened it to reveal a small dress stitched from soft buckskin, dyed in deep reds and browns, decorated with turquoise beads and tiny quillwork. "I made it for the girl I see," Nala said. "Not the one you were." Eliza stared at the dress. Then she hugged Nala tightly. Another first. They held a fire ceremony that evening, not grand, not tribal, but sacred all the same. Tazi placed a feather in Eliza's braid, a symbol of her courage. Nala painted her hands with ochre. Eliza, in her new dress, stood tall before them both. "I don't know where I came from anymore," she said, voice steady, "but I know where I belong." Tazi stepped forward and laid his hand over her heart. "You are my daughter," he said. "Not by birth, by bond." Eliza blinked, her lips trembling. Then she smiled. "I think my mother would have liked you." The fire crackled above them. The stars came out brighter than any city, clearer than any church window. And there in the wild, far from law and tribe and war, a warrior and a girl with no past formed something neither of them had ever dared believe they could have. Family. Not one born from blood, but one built by choice, by pain, and by the fierce love that only those who've survived great loss can give. The fire burned low. The smoke rose in soft spirals, twisting into the night sky. Tazi sat on a smooth stone near the flames, sharpening a blade with slow, steady strokes. Across from him, Eliza sat cross-legged, humming a quiet tune. Her new, buckskin dress fluttered gently in the breeze, beads glinting in the light. She had grown leaner, stronger, but not hard. Her face had softened again, not into the girl she once was, but someone new, someone balanced between two worlds. The girl beside the fire was no longer lost. She had made her choice. They had remained in the high country through the end of summer. The world below them went on spinning, soldiers searching, settlers moving, tribes shifting camps, but in their hidden hollow, time had slowed. No longer hunted, no longer hiding. They had become something quiet and real. Tazi sometimes thought of returning to the tribe. Sani had likely spoken in his defense. The elders, in time, would understand, but it no longer mattered the way it once had. His loyalty no longer belonged to tradition. It belonged to her. And Eliza, she didn't speak of her past anymore. Not the wagon, not the fire, not the man with the scar. She still remembered, of course, but memory had stopped ruling her. Now, she lived. One afternoon, she carved a rabbit herself, prepared it with wild onions and crushed juniper, and served it proudly. Tazi said nothing, but ate every bite. Then, with the faintest grin, he nodded once. She grinned back. They had found a rhythm, in silence, in effort, in trust. But peace, like all things on the frontier, could never last forever. One morning, Eliza found a mark carved into a tree near the edge of the stream. Faint, fresh, a symbol she didn't recognize, but Tazi did. He stared at it for a long moment before wiping it away with a blade. "What was it?" she asked. "Tracker's sign," he said. "Someone passed through, saw the smoke." Eliza's eyes darkened, but she didn't ask if they would run. Again, she already knew the answer. That night, they sat beside the fire as usual. Nala had gone back to her people weeks before, returning with herbs and news, promising to speak well of Eliza if word ever reached the Apache camp again. Now it was just the two of them, as it had been since the trail. As it would be for as long as they were allowed. Eliza reached into her small pack and pulled out the ribbon, the same one she had clung to when Tazi first found her. It was worn now, frayed, Faded, she looked at it, then at the fire. And without a word, she dropped it into the flames. Tazhi didn't stop her. She watched it curl, catch, and vanish into ash. When it was gone, she looked at him and said softly, "I don't need to hold on to what's gone." He nodded. Then he reached into his own pouch and pulled out something Eliza hadn't seen in months, the turquoise stone, the one he'd once given her, the one she had lost during their flight from the bounty hunters. He had found it again. He placed it in her hand and closed her fingers round it. "Some things stay," he said. She held it tight. The fire popped, sending sparks into the stars. The sky above was deep and endless, like the future they hadn't yet named. But for the first time, it didn't feel empty. Eliza leaned against him. "When I grow up," she whispered, "I want to teach a girl like me how to survive, how not to be afraid." Tazi placed a hand on her back. "You already are," he said. She smiled. And somewhere in the darkness, where no bluecoats or raiders or doubters could reach, a father and a daughter bound by nothing but choice and fire and fierce loyalty sat together in a place the world had forgotten. And they were home.